Captain James Walker stood tall as he looked out the curved window of the Galactic Alliance's central space station. The stars seemed different from up here, more alive somehow. Earth had only joined the Alliance 3 months ago, and humans were still seen as the new kids, curious but mostly harmless. "Captain, they're ready for us," said Lisa Reed, his second in command. Her face was serious as always. James nodded and straightened his blue uniform jacket. "Then let's not keep them waiting." The meeting room was large, with a round table in the center. Around it sat representatives from 6 different alien species. Some had scales, others had extra eyes or arms, but all looked at the humans with the same expression: doubt. Vex, the lead diplomat of the Alliance, stood up. He was tall and thin with gray skin that seemed to shimmer in the light. "Captain Walker, we have invited Earth to this council because every member must contribute to our shared goals. We face a serious problem." A hologram appeared in the center of the table, showing a swirling mass of red and orange gases. "This is the burning nebula," Vex explained. "Inside it, radiation levels are extreme and gravity shifts without warning. But beyond it lie 12 planets with millions of people who need power." James leaned forward, interested. "You want to build something inside that nebula?" "A power relay station," said another alien with blue skin and 4 arms. "The nebula's energy could power those outer worlds for centuries. But it's impossible. We've tried 3 times, all failures. Nothing we build can last in those conditions," added a small round alien with blinking eyes on stalks. "The radiation eats through our strongest metals. The gravity crushes our best shields." James looked at the hologram, turning his head slightly as he studied it. "And you're bringing this to us because—" Vex made a sound like a sigh. "Humans have a reputation, Captain. You solve problems in unusual ways, ways we would not think of." "You mean we're too stupid to know what's impossible?" James said with a small smile. Several aliens shifted uncomfortably. "That is not how I would phrase it," Vex replied. "But essentially, yes. Your species attempts things that more experienced races would avoid." Lisa whispered in James's ear, "Sir, they're setting us up to fail. This is a test they know we can't pass." But James was still staring at the nebula, his eyes reflecting the orange glow. Something inside him, the same thing that had made him build a boat from junk when he was 10, the same feeling that had pushed him through engineering school when everyone said he wasn't smart enough, stirred to life. "The materials degrade in the nebula?" he asked. An alien with skin like stone nodded. "Within hours. The radiation signature is unlike anything in known space. And the gravitational shifts. Random and severe. No pattern we can find." James sat back and crossed his arms. The room went quiet as they waited for his answer. He knew the smart thing would be to decline, to ask for an easier first assignment for Earth. His superiors would understand. Even the aliens expected him to say no. "We'll do it," he said. Lisa's eyes went wide. "Captain, Earth accepts this challenge," James said louder, standing up. "Give us your data on the previous attempts. We'll need full access to your material science databases too." The aliens looked at each other in surprise. Vex seemed almost pleased, though it was hard to read his alien face. "You understand what you're agreeing to?" asked the 4-armed alien. "No one has solved this problem. It cannot be solved." James smiled, a confident human smile that had no equivalent among the Alliance species. "Then I guess we'll be the first." As they left the meeting, Lisa grabbed his arm. "James, this is crazy. You just volunteered us for a suicide mission." He looked back at the hologram of the swirling nebula one more time. "No, Lisa, I volunteered us to do the impossible. There's a difference." And somehow, despite everything she knew about science and logic, Lisa almost believed him. The large meeting room at Earth's space agency buzzed with voices. James had called together the best minds he could find, people known for thinking outside the box. Charts and images of the burning nebula covered the walls. The data from the Alliance's failed attempts filled dozens of screens. "So let me get this straight," said Dr. Alan Foster, running a hand through his messy hair. "We need to build something that can survive in conditions that melt the strongest metals in the galaxy." James nodded. "That's about it." "Wonderful," Alan muttered. "Just wonderful." Dr. Marcus Thompson, who had been quiet until now, stepped forward. He was tall and thin with dark-rimmed glasses. "The problem isn't the materials," he said, pointing at the screens. "The Alliance has been trying to find something strong enough to withstand the nebula's forces. And that approach has failed 3 times, Lisa added. Marcus nodded. "Exactly. We need to stop thinking about fighting against the nebula and start thinking about working with it." The room went quiet. An Alliance observer named Noor stood in the corner, her green eyes watching them carefully. She had been sent to report on their progress, or more likely, their failure. "What do you mean, working with it?" James asked. Marcus walked to one of the screens. "Earth has life forms that thrive in extreme conditions, bacteria in volcanic vents, organisms that live under crushing ocean pressure. They don't survive by being stronger than their environment. They adapt to it." Alan's eyes widened. "You're suggesting we create a structure that adapts like a living thing?" "Not exactly like a living thing," Marcus said, "but something that can bend instead of break, something that can absorb energy instead of being destroyed by it." Noor stepped forward, speaking for the first time. Her voice was cool and smooth. "The Alliance has considered adaptive structures. The idea was rejected as too complex and unpredictable." Alan turned to her with a smile. "With all due respect, making things complex and unpredictable is what humans do best." For the next 2 weeks, they worked day and night. Alan developed a new material, part metal, part synthetic organic compounds, that could heal small damage by rearranging its structure. Marcus created computer models showing how their design might withstand the gravitational shifts. "It's like a school of fish," he explained to James one night, pointing at his simulation. "When danger comes, they don't try to become stronger. They change their formation." James watched the pattern on the screen move and shift. "Will it work?" Marcus shrugged. "In theory, maybe. In reality, I have no idea. We're in uncharted territory." When they presented their plan to the Alliance representatives, the reaction was exactly what they expected. "This is not engineering," said one alien with scales that changed color with his mood. "This is fantasy." "Your structure would be completely unpredictable," another added. "How would you control it?" "We wouldn't," James admitted. "Not completely. It would have basic programming, but it would need to adapt on its own." Noor stood at the back of the room. "You are proposing to build a semi-autonomous structure and place it in one of the most dangerous regions of space." "Yes," James said simply. "That is not just unlikely to succeed. It could be dangerous," she said. Alan stepped forward. "Look, we've studied your previous attempts. You built strong, stable structures with clear blueprints and perfect materials, and they all failed. Maybe it's time to try something that seems crazy." "This is not how the Alliance approaches engineering problems," Noor said firmly. James met her eyes. "Maybe that's exactly why we're going to solve it." The approval to build a small prototype came reluctantly. Most of the Alliance thought they were wasting time and resources. As James and his team began construction in Earth's orbit, Noor watched their every move, recording their frequent failures and setbacks. "Your government is becoming concerned," she told James after a particularly difficult day. "They wonder if you are damaging Earth's reputation in the Alliance." James looked at the half-built prototype, parts of it still smoking from a failed test. "Tell them that making history always looks like making a mess, until suddenly it doesn't." Noor tilted her head. "You really believe you can do this?" It wasn't a question, but James answered anyway. "We can. We will. And when we do, The impossible will need a new definition. The prototype hung in Earth's orbit like a strange metal spider web, its shimmering nodes connected by flexible links that could stretch and contract. It didn't look like any machine the Alliance had ever built. It looked almost alive. Test number 14 ready to begin, Lisa announced from the control room. The team had been working for 3 months now, and every test had ended in failure. But each failure taught them something new. James nodded. Start the radiation sequence. The test chamber glowed red as it filled with the same type of radiation found in the burning nebula. The prototype shuddered, its outer layers beginning to smoke. Several of the nodes flickered and went dark. Temperature rising, Alan reported, eyes fixed on his screen. Structure integrity at 60% and falling. Marcus paced behind them, chewing on his lower lip. It's still not adapting fast enough. Noor watched from her designated corner, her face expressionless as always. But James thought he saw something new in her eyes today. Not just the usual skepticism, but a hint of curiosity. Wait, Lisa said suddenly. Look at Section 3. On the screen, one part of the prototype was behaving differently. Instead of trying to resist the radiation, it seemed to be absorbing it, glowing brighter. The nodes in that section rearranged themselves into a new pattern. What's happening? James asked. Marcus leaned forward, pushing his glasses up his nose. It's working. That section is using the energy to power its own adaptive systems. For a few moments, it looked like they might have success. Then alarms blared as the rest of the structure began to break apart. The test chamber automatically shut down. Test 14 failed, Lisa announced, her voice tired. Alan hit his desk in frustration. We're missing something. The theory is sound, but in practice. James stared at the damaged prototype, but one section worked. Why just that one? Marcus replayed the test data. Section 3 had a different connection pattern. The nodes were closer together, allowing for faster communication between them. Like neurons in a brain, James murmured. Noor approached their console for the first time. Your Earth Council has sent a message. They are concerned about the resources being used on this project with no results. The Alliance is also questioning whether to continue supporting your efforts. James barely seemed to hear her. He was still staring at the screen. Marcus, what if we've been thinking too linearly this whole time? Marcus looked up. What do you mean? We designed the structure as a fixed network that can adapt within certain parameters. But what if we made it more like a swarm? Independent nodes that can completely reorganize based on conditions. Alan's eyes widened. That would mean each node would need its own power source, its own decision-making ability. Exactly, James said. Instead of one structure trying to survive, we create hundreds of smaller units that work together. That would be incredibly complex to program, Lisa pointed out. Marcus was already typing, his fingers flying over the keyboard. Not if we use a simple set of rules for each node, like birds in a flock. Simple rules can create complex behaviors. Noor stepped closer, her interest now obvious. The Alliance considered and rejected swarm technology decades ago. The energy requirements would be enormous. Not if each node can harvest energy from the nebula itself, James countered. The same radiation that destroys conventional materials could power our nodes. For 3 more weeks they worked, rebuilding the prototype from scratch. The new design had no fixed shape. It was a collection of floating, intelligent modules that could connect or separate as needed. When Test 23 began, James held his breath. The radiation filled the chamber. The prototype nodes scattered at first, then began to form patterns, connecting and disconnecting, moving like a living organism. Radiation levels at maximum, Lisa reported. Structure integrity, holding at 90%. Energy harvesting is working, Alan added, his voice filled with disbelief. The nodes are actually getting stronger. When the test ended, the control room erupted in cheers. James turned to find Noor standing beside him, her alien features showing what might have been respect. "It appears," she said carefully, "that I will need to send a different kind of report to the Alliance today." James smiled. "Tell them we're ready for a full-scale test, in the actual nebula." "That is a significant leap," Noor cautioned. James looked at the prototype, still moving and shifting in the test chamber like a beautiful, strange dance. Sometimes you have to take a leap to do the impossible. The great council chamber of the Alliance was filled to capacity. Representatives from over 30 different species sat in rising tiers, all eyes focused on the humans standing in the center. James felt like he was on trial, which, in a way, he was. Vex stood at the speaker's platform. "This emergency session has been called to discuss the human project for the burning nebula relay station. Captain Walker's team believes they have a viable solution and requests permission for a full-scale implementation." A murmur ran through the crowd. An alien with metallic skin and glowing yellow eyes stood up. "We have reviewed the test data. This swarm technology is unpredictable and potentially dangerous. The nodes appear to develop their own patterns that were not in the original programming." "That's the point," James replied. "They learn and adapt to survive." "And what happens when they adapt in ways you did not anticipate?" asked another representative. "What if they spread beyond the nebula?" Lisa stepped forward. "Each node has limitations built into its core programming. They can only function within certain parameters." The debate continued for hours. Many Alliance members were impressed by the prototype's success, but worried about implementing unproven technology on such a large scale. Others seemed almost afraid of what the humans had created. A tall alien from the Trell species rose to speak. His voice was deep and commanding. "The humans have been among us for less than a year. Now they propose to place what amounts to a semi-autonomous system in a critical region of space. Their technology follows no established engineering principles. It should be studied for decades before deployment, not rushed into production." Several representatives nodded in agreement. James could feel the mood of the room turning against them. Then, to everyone's surprise, Noor requested permission to speak. As she walked to the platform, James noticed she moved with unusual stiffness, even for her species. "I was assigned to observe the human project with the expectation that I would document their failure," she began. "Instead, I witnessed something unexpected." The room grew quiet. "The humans do not approach problems as we do," she continued. "When faced with obstacles, they do not simply apply more force or more resources. They change their entire perspective. They question assumptions that we have held for centuries. And that makes their approach dangerous." The Trull representative cut in. Noor turned to him. "Perhaps, but it also makes it effective. Their prototype succeeded where our best engineers failed 3 times. A small prototype in controlled conditions is not the same as a full-scale implementation in the nebula itself," someone called out. James stepped forward. "That's true. We need to test it in the actual environment. But the people in the outer systems need power now, not after decades of study." The debate raged on until Vex finally called for a vote. It was close, but in the end, the Council granted conditional approval for a limited test in the actual nebula. As they left the chamber, James noticed Noor walking with difficulty. "Are you all right?" he asked. She hesitated before answering. "My species does not tolerate extended exposure to Earth's gravity well. I have been uncomfortable during my time observing your project." James was shocked. "Why didn't you say something? We could have adjusted the gravity in the lab." "That would have been..." She searched for the word. "Special treatment. I was there to observe, not participate." "You've been in pain this whole time just to maintain objectivity?" James asked. "How else would I properly evaluate your work?" she replied, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. James shook his head, smiling slightly. "You know, for all our differences, I think our species share at least one trait: stubbornness." For the first time, Noor's face showed what might have been amusement, perhaps, though we express it differently. As they prepared to leave for the nebula, Lisa pulled James aside. The Council only approved this because they think it will fail. They want to prove that some things really are impossible, even for humans. James looked at his team loading equipment onto their ship. They were tired but determined. Then I guess we'll just have to disappoint them. By failing? Lisa asked. No, James replied with a grin. By succeeding when they're absolutely certain we can't. The human ship hovered at the edge of the burning nebula. Through the viewing window, the swirling clouds of red and orange gas looked both beautiful and deadly. James had never seen anything like it in person. No images could capture the way it pulsed with energy, like a living thing. Final systems check complete, Lisa announced from her station. All equipment is secured and ready for deployment. James nodded. Begin launching the scout drones. Let's get some fresh readings before we send in our nodes. Small unmanned probes shot out from the ship, disappearing into the colorful gases. The data they sent back confirmed what they already knew. The conditions inside were even more extreme than the Alliance's records had suggested. Radiation levels are 30% higher than in our simulations, Marcus reported, his face concerned. The gravitational fluctuations are happening faster too. Ellen studied the readings. The nodes will need to adapt more quickly than we thought. James looked at Noor, who stood quietly to the side. The Council had insisted she accompany the mission with full authority to shut it down if necessary. What do you think? He asked her. She considered for a moment. You should recalibrate based on this new data. That would be the standard procedure. We don't have time for that, James said. The nodes are designed to learn and adapt. Let them do their job. Noor's expression didn't change, but her voice took on a new edge. You are risking the entire project on your first attempt. Sometimes you only get one shot, James replied. The launch of the nodes began an hour later. Thousands of small, shining objects flowed from the ship like metallic seeds, each one programmed with the same basic rules, but able to make its own decisions. The team watched on their screens as the nodes entered the nebula and began to spread out. First wave deployment complete, Lisa reported. Nodes are responding to initial conditions and beginning to form clusters. For the first hour, everything seemed to be working perfectly. The nodes adjusted to the radiation and gravitational shifts, gathering into loose formations that constantly changed and evolved. Energy collection began, with power readings steadily climbing. Then, without warning, alarms blared across the control room. What's happening? James demanded. Marcus's fingers flew across his controls. We're getting unusual readings from Section B7. The nodes there are forming a pattern we've never seen before. On the main screen, they could see a group of nodes pulling away from the main formation, creating what looked like a spiral structure. They're not following the programmed parameters, Lisa said, her voice tense. Alan leaned forward. It looks like they're responding to something we didn't account for. There must be a new type of energy signature in that area. Or they could be malfunctioning, Noor said. This is exactly the type of unpredictable behavior the Council feared. James studied the screens. Are they still collecting energy? Yes, Marcus confirmed. Actually, that section is more efficient than the others. But they're doing it in a way we didn't design. So they're adapting, James said, just like they're supposed to. Noor moved to the emergency shutdown controls. Captain Walker, as the Alliance representative, I must insist we recall the nodes immediately. We need to understand what's happening before proceeding. James was about to argue when a new alarm sounded. This one was different, more urgent. We've got bigger problems, Lisa said. I'm detecting unusual activity at our ship's rear loading bay. Security footage showed something no one expected. Equipment moving on its own, floating out of storage containers. Someone's using a gravity manipulator, Alan said. But who would? Sabotage, James said grimly. Someone doesn't want us to succeed. Lisa ran a quick scan. There's an unauthorized transmission being sent from our ship to somewhere in the nebula. James turned to Noor. Did the Alliance plant a spy on my ship? Her eyes widened. Not with my knowledge. But there are factions within the Alliance who strongly oppose this project. As they argued, the spiral formation of nodes in the nebula grew larger. Whatever was happening out there, it was accelerating, while someone on their own ship worked against them. If we shut down now, James said, looking at the emergency controls in Noor's hand, we may never get another chance. Noor hesitated, caught between duty and curiosity. What do you propose instead? James's eyes glinted with determination. We find the saboteur. And we let our creation show us what it can really do. The ship's corridors echoed with the sound of running feet as security teams searched for the saboteur. James and Lisa made their way to the cargo bay, while Marcus and Alan stayed in the control room to monitor the nodes. Status report, James called over his communicator. The spiral formation is growing, Marcus replied, his voice tense. More nodes are joining it. And it's beautiful, James, like nothing we've ever seen before. We've got bigger problems, Lisa said as they reached the cargo bay. The door was sealed shut. Someone's locked us out. James pressed his hand against the control panel. Override, Captain Walker, security code Omega-37. The door slid open with a hiss, revealing a dimly lit space filled with equipment containers. At first, it seemed empty. Then a shadow moved near the far wall. Show yourself, James called out, his hand moving to his sidearm. A figure stepped forward. A tall alien with smooth blue skin and 4 arms. James recognized him as one of the engineering assistants who had joined the mission at the last minute. Why? James asked simply. The alien's large eyes blinked slowly. The Trell Consortium cannot allow human technology to surpass our own. If your project succeeds, the power balance in the Alliance will shift. So you're willing to sabotage a mission that could help millions of people just to maintain your species status? Lisa demanded. Politics, James muttered with disgust. What did you do to our nodes? The alien held up a small device, a simple disruption signal. It forces some of your nodes to follow my commands instead of yours. Even now, they are forming a pattern that will destabilize the entire formation. James's communicator buzzed. Captain, Marcus's voice came through, sounding strangely excited. The spiral formation is still growing, but it's not causing problems. It's actually improving efficiency by 30%. James looked at the alien, whose face showed confusion. Seems like your plan isn't working. Impossible, the alien said. The nodes should be turning against each other. Maybe they are adapting to your signal too, Lisa suggested. Learning from it instead of being controlled by it. Security personnel arrived, taking the saboteur into custody and confiscating the device. James and Lisa rushed back to the control room, where an incredible sight greeted them on the main screen. The nodes had formed a massive, complex pattern throughout the nebula. Spirals within spirals, constantly shifting, but maintaining a cohesive whole. Energy readings were off the charts. What am I looking at? James asked. Ellen looked up, his eyes wide with wonder. They're not just adapting to survive anymore. They're thriving, using the nebula's energy in ways we never programmed. Noor stood before the screen, her alien features showing clear amazement. I have never seen anything like this in all my years with the Alliance. The beauty of the moment was interrupted by a sudden alarm. The entire display flashed red. What now? James demanded. Marcus worked frantically at his station. The nebula is experiencing some kind of feedback loop. Gravitational forces are increasing exponentially. The nodes are being pulled apart. On the screen, they watched as their creation began to break down. The beautiful patterns dissolved as nodes scattered in all directions. Can we stabilize it? James asked. Not from here, Alan said, shaking his head. The conditions are too extreme. Noor stepped forward. I must follow Council protocol. This mission is now classified as a failure. We must recall all remaining nodes and withdraw immediately. James stared at the screen, watching years of work falling apart before his eyes. Half the nodes were already dark or drifting uselessly. "We were so close," Lisa said quietly. Marcus continued to study the readings. "There's something strange happening in the center of the formation. Some of the nodes are still active, but they're changing." "Changing how?" James asked. "I don't know. It's like they're merging together, becoming something new." James made a decision. "We're not leaving yet." "Captain Walker," Noor said firmly, "as Alliance representative, I must insist." 24 hours, James cut in. "Give us one more day. If we can't fix this by then, we'll go home and admit defeat." Noor hesitated, then slowly nodded. 24 hours, no more. As the ship's systems continued to flash warnings, James gathered his team. "Okay, we need a new approach. We've been trying to control the nodes too much. What if we give them even more freedom to adapt?" "You want to remove more restrictions from the programming?" Ellen asked, looking uncertain. James nodded. "Not just remove restrictions. Let's give them a new directive altogether. Don't fight the nebula. Become part of it." "That's not engineering anymore," Lisa pointed out. "That's almost faith," James finished for her. "Sometimes, that's what you need to do the impossible." For 20 hours, the human team worked without rest. They reprogrammed the remaining active nodes with a new directive, removing almost all restrictions except for the most basic safety protocols. The goal was no longer to build a structure that could survive in the nebula, but to create something that was part of the nebula itself. "Last batch of updates transmitted," Marcus announced, his voice hoarse from exhaustion. "All remaining functional nodes are now operating under the new parameters." James nodded, rubbing his tired eyes. "Now we wait." The control room was quiet. Even Noor had stopped insisting they abandon the mission, watching with undisguised curiosity as the humans attempted one final desperate solution. For hours, nothing seemed to happen. The nodes drifted in the nebula, some still maintaining weak connections, others completely dark. The team took turns resting, but James remained at his post, staring at the screens. 4 hours left, Lisa reminded him gently. James nodded without looking away. "I know." Then, almost too subtle to notice at first, something began to change. A small cluster of nodes near the center of the nebula started to pulse with a different kind of light. Not the artificial glow of their power systems, but something that seemed to come from the nebula itself. "Are you seeing this?" James asked, leaning forward. Ellen rushed to his station. "Energy readings are changing." "The nodes are. It's like they're channeling the nebula's energy rather than just harvesting it." More nodes began to light up, reconnecting in a pattern unlike anything they had programmed. The formation was organic, flowing like water, constantly changing yet somehow more stable than their original design. "The gravitational fluctuations are evening out in that sector," Marcus reported, his voice filled with disbelief. "It's as if the nodes are somehow calming the nebula." "Or communicating with it," James murmured. Hour by hour, the network grew. Nodes that they had thought destroyed came back online, joining the new formation. The ship's sensors struggled to make sense of what they were seeing. "Energy is flowing," Alan said, "not just within the nebula, but outward toward the outer systems." Noor stepped forward, her alien eyes wide. "You've done it. The relay is functioning." James smiled, but shook his head. "No, we didn't do it. They did." He pointed to the screen. "The nodes have become something more than what we built." The final hour of their deadline arrived. The relay was now fully operational, channeling the nebula's chaotic energy into a stable power source for the outer systems. James sent a message to Earth and the Alliance Council announcing their success. Within days, a delegation arrived, led by Vex himself. They watched in amazement as the relay continued to function flawlessly, adapting to every shift in the nebula's conditions. "I must admit," Vex said, standing beside James on the observation deck, "when I gave you this challenge, I did not truly believe it could be solved." "Neither did we at first," James replied honestly. But we learned to think differently. By giving up control, Noor added. She had chosen to remain with the human team, fascinated by their methods, a concept most Alliance engineers would find impossible to accept. As they prepared to return to Alliance headquarters, where the humans would be officially recognized for their achievement, James took one last look at the nebula. The swirling gases now pulsed with patterns created by their nodes, or perhaps it was more accurate to say that the nodes now moved with patterns created by the nebula. It was impossible to tell where one ended and the other began. You know what they're calling it, Lisa said, joining him at the window. What? The Impossible Station. She smiled. The name has already spread throughout the Alliance. James laughed. I like it. Back at Alliance headquarters, the Great Council chamber was once again filled to capacity. This time, however, the mood was different. The humans stood not as supplicants, but as equals who had accomplished what no one thought possible. Vex stood at the speaker's platform. Today we recognize the human achievement in the burning nebula. What they have created will bring power to millions and advance our understanding of adaptive technologies. The Trell representative, whose spy had tried to sabotage the mission, spoke next. We also acknowledge that our assumptions about proper engineering methods were limited. Perhaps there is something to be learned from the human approach. After the ceremony, as the team celebrated, Noor approached James with a datapad. The Alliance has asked me to compile a report on human problem-solving methods. They are particularly interested in this concept you call thinking outside the box. James smiled. It might be hard to explain. It's not really a method. It's more about challenging assumptions, like assuming something is impossible. She asked. Exactly, James replied. For humans, being told something is impossible isn't the end of the story. It's just the beginning. Noor looked thoughtful. The Alliance has a list of other impossible engineering problems. Perhaps you would be interested. James glanced at his team, saw the spark of excitement in their eyes, and grinned. Absolutely. After all, impossible is what we do best.